Utica is located in Macomb County, midway between Pontiac and Mount Clemens. It's a great location for a tiny city of 5,000. We're nestled among the giant cities and urban townships, but it's our heritage on the Clinton River that really makes us unique. Welcome to Utica and the story of our 200 years. The Clinton River is why Utica is here. For more than 3,000 years, Native peoples camped and lived in the valley of the Clinton and used its shores to grow crops. The Ojibwe, Chippewas, Ottawas, and Potawatomis, all Algonquin speakers, were in the area where they hunted, raised crops, and fished the waterways. In 1817, the first white settlers, Nathaniel Squires and his family, came upon a beautiful spot where two well-traveled Indian trails crossed, and they built a cabin just about at today's intersection of Auburn Road and Cass Avenue. They carved a farm out of the wilderness forest and began the first permanent settlement. Joseph Stead and more families came. They laid out a village with streets, churches, stores, and homes, and in 1829 formally became a community with the territorial government of Michigan. Before Michigan's statehood in 1837, the small settlement chose the permanent name of Utica, after Gurdon Leach's hometown in Utica, New York. Formerly, it had been known as Harlow and sometimes Hogs Hollow because of the wild boars that roamed the woods. But a real community formed, even starting their first church, as the Methodists met regularly in a cabin in 1823. Before statehood also came the 1818 formation of Macomb County, and in 1835, the larger Shelby Township was divided into two, with the southern half named Jefferson, a name that got changed to Sterling in 1837. As early as 1820, a school was built near the site of Epler Junior High. Utica lay directly on the boundary of the two townships, right along the river. In the decades that followed, the Clinton-Kalamazoo Canal promised to make Utica a center for trade and industry, as it would cross the whole state and be another Erie Canal. But financial crises doomed it to failure. Can you find remnants of the canal in the city or nearby? In 1839, the first real building for the Utica Methodist Church was erected. It was the first church in Utica. In the next 100 years, the tiny settlement remained the heart of family life for both Shelby and Sterling. It grew and became important for the social, political, and commercial life of the whole area. Spring Hill Farm, just to the northwest of the village, became a stop on the Underground Railroad in the 1850s as slaves escaping their tyrannical owners made their way to Canada and freedom. When the Civil War broke out, Utica's finest men and boys joined the Michigan militia and served valiantly in quelling the Southern Rebellion. For example, Seymour Brownell headed the 2nd Michigan Cavalry with his brother, Dr. William Brownell, as surgeon. Dr. Brownell's medical practice thrived after the war, and he built the large brick 2-story home for his family, which still stands at the corner of Hahn and Cass Avenue. Professionals of all kinds settled in Utica, with the arrival of Lyman T. Jenney being the first doctor in 1830 and a school organizer. Seth K. Shetterly was a lawyer who hung his shingle in the village in 1844, as well as many other gentlemen who engaged in general mercantile trade over the years. Two churches, Methodist and Presbyterian, were active in the village when the Congregational Church established itself in 1855, and the first Mass for Catholics was said in a home as St. Lawrence Parish Mission began in 1866. Trinity Lutheran also began in the early 1880s at its current location. During the next century, a variety of religious institutions and schools established themselves in the village. The Utica Union School, first site of the later Utica Community Schools, rose on the west side of Brownell Street at Stead in 1860. It was a brick 3-story structure with an auditorium on top, different entrances and play areas for boys and girls, and renamed Utica High School in 1900. It served an elementary next door. As such, and then with many remodels became Epler Junior High today. A strap railroad was built to Detroit, and plank toll roads crept into the rural countryside. Between 1829 and the end of the century, a number of mills, like the canal roller mills, were built. The latter evolved into the Utica Milling Company, an active business serving the whole area for well over a century. Land was cleared and farmed, stores were built, including distilleries, carriage shops, livery stables, casket factory, creamery, a bank, a general store, school, and a permanent post office. In the early years, mail had been dropped off for settlers and picked up by riders at a hollow tree near Canal and River Road. This was one of the main stops for service between Pontiac, Mount Clemens, Port Huron, and points north. The post office changed location many times, as it was dependent on who was the postmaster or postmistress at the time. Entertainment for hard-working men in the 1840s was often the ball alley, located on Cass Avenue. However, the wives and sweethearts of the men felt lonely and disenfranchised by the inordinate amount of time spent by their men over at the ball alley. So in the dark night of July 9th, 1846, the women attacked the building with axes, a ball and tackle, leveling it with a thunderous crash. Their men awoke, gasped in disbelief, and did nothing. In 1872, service on the Detroit to Bay City Railroad stopped at the Utica Depot 4 times a day. A number of hotels had serviced the village, but the largest was the 3-story Exchange Hotel. It stood for 75 years at the corner of Main Street and Cass. It was the site of many dances, dinners, political rallies, and social gatherings. Unfortunately, it was destroyed when its barn caught fire in 1904 in the village's worst ever disaster. Life included churches, dances, parades, picnics, concerts, horse races, school, and even baseball. It was natural for teams of homegrown ball players to challenge neighboring towns to a game, often for the whole town to watch. Pride of triumph lasted until the next loss, but it was always a grand day when your boys won the game. The modern era began for real with the village's reincorporation in 1877 and the installation of telephone service in 1887. Publication of a weekly newspaper, the Utica Sentinel, arrived in 1876 and continued through the various owners through 1971. More than a century almost. Sidewalks were cemented in 1902, and water from the Clinton had been piped to businesses and homes, sometimes even in wooden pipes. Roads were often planks, and tolls were collected for operation and maintenance. Utica Road's an existing example. Stage lines and liveries operated in the village and between towns, getting people, produce, and products to their destinations. With the advent of electrical service to businesses and homes, the landscape took on a whole new look. Utica had a village marshal, a fire brigade, and a justice of the peace. Life was good as the new century was dawning. Did you know Utica almost burned down 2 years in a row? In 1904 and again in 1905, terrible fires swept through the downtown. Wooden shops and homes were fuel for the catastrophe, which claimed 40 buildings, but the fire brigade just did not have the ability to stem the conflagration. In 1904, help arrived via the railroad from Detroit, but the damage was immeasurable. While the 40 buildings were lost, most with no insurance, there was only one minor injury. The village was almost half destroyed, and estimates put the damage at well over $3 million in today's terms. In reaction to the fire, village leaders passed new regulations. It required buildings be brick or stone, anything fireproof, if possible, to lessen the danger of fire. Unfortunately, fire struck again in 1905 when the wooden Clinton Hotel, known as the Utica Inn, near the canal burned along with a number of landmark structures. Damage estimates this time put the loss at about 1/5 of the prior year's destruction. Utica became a fifth-class city in 1937 under the Home Rule Cities Act and adopted a hybrid charter in which the mayor was both the chair of city council and the chief executive officer. Its most recent 1997 revision kept the same organizational structure. The school system, Utica Community Schools, formed more than a decade later. The consolidation of schools in the area, forming UCS, led to the current second largest school system in the state of Michigan. It now covers 5 jurisdictions and more than 40 buildings. There are 4 Class A high schools, 7 junior highs, 25 elementaries, and a number of special facilities. It's one of the most respected districts in the nation and has graduated a plethora of celebrities, sports stars, artists, and political figures. With the advent of the automobile, Utica gained renown as the site of the first Chevrolet dealership in Michigan, Engel Chevrolet on Hall Road. It was owned by J.F. Engel and his son Harold and operated for decades until purchased by Buff Whalen and moved to Sterling Heights on Van Dyke. A Ford dealership was opened by Vic Messmore and William Sipperly just 4 years later in 1920, and it too served the area until becoming Jerome Duncan Ford in 1959 and also moving to Sterling Heights later. The city saw a number of other dealerships over the next half-century, including Dodge, Plymouth, Studebaker, Buick, you name it, and many used cars enterprises. The 20th century was rife with global conflict, and of course, Utica's citizens and businesses played a role. 2 world wars, the Korean conflict, Vietnam, Persian Gulf War, Iraq, and still Afghanistan. The War Memorial behind City Hall honors the dead, and the American Legion Post took the name of Victor I. Rick Post 351 in honor of a local soldier who died just shortly before the end of World War I. Their Memorial Day parade down Cass Avenue was one of the exciting tributes to our armed forces each and every year. Outside work, church, and school, Utica residents always knew how to play. The abandoned canal and its mill pond offered ice skating in the winter. Small movie theaters were in operation for decades. Roller rinks were popular, and bowling had been around since the 1840s. Dort's Sweet Shop in Auburn was a meeting place for youngsters and adults alike, as was the notorious pool hall. Restaurants abounded in the commercial district, as did drive-ins. The Big Boy, while it was in Shelby, was most popular, along with the A&W and S&J drive-in. Many a married couple met for the first time at these local amusement spots. Once the modern Deluxe Theater was built on Van Dyke, it became the only show in town. It operated from 1949 to the late 1960s. Add to this group Irma's Frozen Custard at the western edge of town, the Dairy Queen, and drugstore soda fountains, you have quite an assortment. Outside, kids and adults still like to play baseball every summer. It was truly the American pastime for this area. The Utica Merchants team was a descendant of the 19th century Zephyrs and Bucephalas. Tennis, swimming, hiking, foot races, basketball, all were organized. With the high school's indoor pool, competitive swimming and diving became popular. The opening of the Huron-Clinton Metropolitan Authority parks, like Metro Beach and Stony Creek, helped by offering more and better places for the families in the area to recreate. Adults in Utica always stood up for the service to their neighbors. There was a long tradition of churches helping people, but in the 1900s, service became a way of life. Utica was central to many groups and clubs that formed to improve the quality of life for all our people. Some examples are the Rotary Club, the Kiwanis Club, the Lions Club, the Business and Professional Women's Club, the Freemasons Lodge No. 75, the Utica Community Welfare Club, the American Legion, and Utica Tuesday Club. The latter were the organizers of the Utica Public Library in 1933, an institution that has lasted very strongly even to today. It is currently housed on Auburn Road on the city's municipal campus and is part of the large suburban library cooperative. Utica's been a relatively safe area to work and play throughout its history. That's largely due to the fine police, fire, public works, and administration. While the village was very small, leaving the rural area out of its boundaries allowed farmers lower taxes. And it had to use the county sheriff and local marshal to keep the peace. 250 acres of land had been added by the John Stead addition in the 1800s, and more in the 60s and 70s through annexation from Shelby Township. The population doubled, as did the size of the city. Utica and its surrounding farms became the world leader in the production of hothouse rhubarb and the Michigan leader in mushroom production. Festivals celebrating both were held for a decade. Even Joe Louis owned a farm near Utica where he trained and raised horses. The police department grew from very few officers in chief to a modern, well-equipped and trained force of professionals who served the public 24/7. This evolution occurred mainly in the latter half of the 20th century through to today. Utica has had only one officer killed in the line of duty, and that was Marshal Andrew Bastendorf. He was murdered in 1929 investigating a break-in of a clothing store. It was theorized that his assailant was a member of the infamous Purple Gang out of Detroit. Bastendorf had killed, in a prior investigation, one of their members. The fire department began in the 1880s as an ill-equipped brigade of residents that often was not well organized. After the big fires of 1904 and 5 and World War I, the village council funded the purchase of a fire engine, hoses, a siren, and named a chief whose job it was to recruit and train firefighters. This began in 1926 and has evolved into today's well-trained, well-equipped, and highly professional department, which responds to fire, rescue, and emergency medical calls, including advanced life support ambulances. Dispatch services for both departments are housed in the police department. While the original police and fire covered 72 square miles outside of the city and village, their area of service diminished when both neighboring townships formed their own fire and police departments. The rudiments of a Department of Public Works also began in the late 1880s, but was formally organized in the 1900s. Water service began in the 20s, drawing water from the Clinton and wells, but because of state and federal regulations, the city joined the Detroit water and sewer system, first for water and later sewer services in the 1960s and 70s. The department's responsibilities are numerous, with the challenge of maintaining streets, water, sewer, public buildings, parks, and snow removal. They are led by a superintendent and work done by a skilled group of employees who are all cross-trained for all their many jobs. Detroit Edison required that street names be revised in each county that it covered in the 1930s to avoid duplication and assure proper record keeping. All Utica streets were reviewed, and just a few kept their name, like Cass Avenue. The names chosen are a directory of families and individuals who had made their mark in Utica's history. Chrisman, Davis, Brownell, Stead, Chappeton, Ruby, McClellan, Messmore, Summers, Hahn, Engel, and Grant Park. All famous families or individuals. Some, however, were extensions from Detroit, like Van Dyke, when it was named Shelby Road, but once it connected on both ends to Van Dyke, the name changed. Utica Road's another example. It's named after Utica Junction, now Roseville, and Pontiac Road became Auburn. Main Street also became Auburn. The road to Mount Clemens was Hall Road or Town Line Road, so it stayed Hall Road. In August of 1987, the Supreme Court of Michigan rendered a very important decision for the city. Jurisdiction over 1/2 square mile of property annexed from the Charter Township of Shelby extended the boundary of Utica all the way to Shaner Road and a 1/2 mile north of Hall Road. This annexation from the township was the subject of a very long 17-year legal battle between the township and the city. Everything ended well in a settlement. For the past years, Utica and its neighbor to the south, Sterling Heights, as well as Shelby Township, have worked well together. Both communities and the city shared services and have an excellent working relationship. They back up each other's police and fire incidents, and they're all part of a library cooperative, cable TV resources, and student programs. Internally, the city of Utica faced the millennial challenge of upgrading not only its infrastructure, which was long neglected, but its workforce, equipment, and levels of service. Cable TV, introduced in 1982, provided live telecasts of public meetings starting in 1988. A city newsletter, The City Limits, hit local mailboxes twice a year beginning in '88, and now it's digital. A remodel of the municipal building supported the need for change and gave an updated working environment to the administration and the police department, as well as the jail. Similarly, Riverside 175, built on municipally owned land at the foot of Greeley and Nichols Street, was made to provide 54 one- and two-bedroom apartments for Utica's senior population and a meeting room for the senior organization, Utica Pioneers. Annually, the Parks and Rec Commission organizes and runs 6 major events. All are lively, family-oriented activities that add to the quality of life in this small city. In 1992, the city undertook a major event, its 175th anniversary of its founding. 6 months of activities plus a grand pageant at Swinehart Field and a 3-hour parade marked the milestone. In the early 1990s, the city also moved forward to stimulate commercial development through the formation of a downtown development authority supported by a tax increment finance authority. DDA district produced a beautiful landscape, paver patterned sidewalks and crosswalks, pedestrian decorative lighting, street furniture, the Riverwalk Park, decorative trees, a signature sign, and hanging baskets. In the late 1990s and the early 21st century, the city developed the area west of M53 Expressway, where condominiums developed and came on the scene, as well as 6 significant hotels. They offered amenities that business travelers fell in love with. With the widening of M59, Utica stood to lose 10% of its commercial tax base, but it took the lead in pushing for the improvements because it was the right thing to do for the region. By the mid-1990s, this almost $400 million project was a reality, and today it's again undergoing yet another major upgrade. Recently, the completion of our major Clinton River hike and bike trail and construction of Jimmy John's Field has made Utica a destination. The real bonus for the city is the added economic benefits such access brings to our historic downtown and to the actual quality of life for our residents. Utica, with its 6 hotels, great restaurants, new ballpark, and being a walkable community, is among the new wave of development in the Detroit area. With a treasured past and a challenging future, Utica continues its path forward in order to maintain its wonderful position as the best little city in Michigan. Happy birthday, Utica!